The fake heiress, Jean Shore, has left a suicide note prior to taking her own life. In the note, she claims that I'm the one who killed her. In order to make me admit my crime, my parents has sent me to an institution as a human test subject. Every day, I'm forced to endure inhuman torture of all sorts. Needless to say, I'm in so much pain that I choose to secretly take some poison in order to kill myself. But my enraged older brother, Sebastian Shore, saves my life. With bloodshot eyes, he yanks me by the hair while yelling at me. The pain that you've gone through isn't even 1,000th of the pain Jean had endured. You don't have the right to die. I can only obey Sebastian numbly. But soon, I get sent to the restricted area. There, my belly swells with life, only for me to lose it sometime later. Finally, I've learned my lesson and become docile. No matter what anyone asks me, I keep admitting that I'm a vile woman who has killed Jean. My parents burst into delighted tears. Sebastian can't wait to have me sent to the court, where I will be sentenced for my crime. He tells me, as long as you admit your crime and go through the punishment, we'll forgive you. I say yes in an obedient manner. I know that my family wants me to be sentenced to death, but what they don't know is that I can't live long enough for the death sentence to be carried out. The moment I walked into the courtroom, I heard the entire gallery suck in a sharp breath. It was all because I was dressed in torn, filthy clothes, with not a single uninjured patch of skin on my body. Every inch of me was covered in wounds from being abused and humiliated. Mom and Dad saw the way everyone was pointing at and whispering, their faces twisted with anger and resentment. Didn't we take you to a doctor yesterday to get those injuries treated? And now you're showing up looking like this. Are you trying to make everyone think we're the ones who abused you? You really are vicious to the core, Sonia. The words stabbed into me like knives, but inside I felt nothing at all. I was their biological daughter, yet I had never once measured up to Jean Shore, the fake heiress. After Jean's death, they'd taken every ounce of grief and rage they had and dumped it all on me. My brother Sebastian Shore's gaze was especially cold when it landed on me. Sonia, what are you trying to pull now? Playing the victim again? You think we're going to feel sorry for you? You sure didn't think about today when you killed Jean, did you? Mom's tears burst forth like a dam breaking when she heard Jean's name. My darling Jean, why wasn't it you who died instead of her, Sonia? I lowered my head and stared at the wounds on my body, suddenly a little dazed. Would they still look at me with this much hatred if I really were dead? Would Mom ever bawl for me the way she was now? Probably not. As for Sebastian, he knew better than anyone where all my injuries came from. After all, during my time being locked up in that lab, he was the only one who came by every day just to watch me being tortured. Just yesterday, he'd yanked me up by the hair with a cold laugh and told me to go to court exactly as I was now. The more people cursed me, the happier it made him. And now, he'd gotten exactly what he wanted. I closed my eyes and said calmly, don't waste any more time. Let's just get this over with. I wanted to end this pain as soon as possible and leave them forever. Right before the judge was about to start the trial, Sebastian suddenly spoke again. Sonia, remember that you brought all of this on yourself. You're going to accept the verdict, whatever it is. I grimaced, knowing exactly what he meant. He was afraid I'd be like before, refusing to admit to any of the charges. He was even more afraid I'd resist when I heard that I'd be sentenced to death. But he had no idea I'd stopped wanting to live a long time ago. I was dragged to the defendant's stand. Because I hadn't eaten in so long, my legs were so weak I could barely stand. I had to cling to the rail in front of me, my ruined knees half collapsing toward the floor. Not a single person in that courtroom felt any sympathy for me. To them, I was nothing more than a murderer. Only Sebastian's gaze was dark, conflicted, and hard to read. After struggling with himself for a long while, he finally told someone to bring over a chair for me to sit on. I paused for a moment and glanced in Sebastian's direction. He was getting chewed out by Mom and Dad. Why did you let her sit down? Do you actually feel sorry for her? Have you forgotten that they still haven't found Jean's body? Sebastian kept his head bowed, not daring to look my way. He said in a low voice, it's just a chair. If she passes out again, she'll use it as another excuse to escape punishment. That made Mom and Dad shut their mouths, albeit reluctantly. They then turned and shot me another vicious glare. I withdrew my gaze and forced a bitter smile. They didn't notice that my knees were already rotting and mangled beyond recognition. Even sitting down sent a wave of searing pain through me. But honestly, it didn't matter anymore. I decided to treat this as my last bit of familial affection for them. After this day, all blood ties between us would be thoroughly severed. To guarantee I was telling the truth, the staff hooked me up to a lie detector. Right after that, the judge banged the gavel and the trial began. Sonia Shore, what were you doing on the day the victim, Jean Shore, died? It took me a long time to react before I slowly opened my mouth. That day was both my birthday and Jean's. Of course, my parents and Sebastian would never celebrate my birthday. They would only gather around Jean with smiles, acting like I didn't exist. I was long used to it. So, I went up to the rooftop alone to quietly enjoy the small cake I'd bought for myself. That was when everything went wrong. Someone covered my eyes and abducted me. By the time I opened my eyes again, I found myself lying in an abandoned building, my whole body tightly bound. A man in black wearing a mask stood nearby, holding an electric baton and shocking me over and over. The sharp pain tore screams from my throat until I finally passed out. When I came to again, all I saw were my parents and Sebastian's shattered faces. They told me that Jean had been abducted and asked if I knew where she was. My whole body hurt so badly I could barely breathe. I had no idea what they were talking about. Then, Sebastian suddenly shouted and found the suicide note Jean had left behind in a bloody corner. Over the past 2 years, I'd rehashed these memories more times than I could count, but my parents and Sebastian never believed me. So right now, I recalled the questions Sebastian had hurled at me back in the lab and answered them loud and clear. I hired someone to create a diversion, then abducted Jean. Did you act alone? Yes. Mom, Dad, and Sebastian instantly grew agitated. I knew it. You're finally admitting the truth. My poor Jean, if I'd known you were this vicious, I never would have brought you home in the first place. The spectators were furious too. She admitted she's a murderer. Give her the death penalty right now. And she had the nerve to inflict those wounds on herself to win sympathy. She's beyond redemption. I support giving her the death penalty. A storm of curses crashed down on me, but I felt nothing. I just numbly waited for the verdict. The jury muttered among themselves for a while before having the judge ask me one last question. Where did you dispose of Jean Shore's body? Please note that this is the most critical piece of physical evidence. If you refuse to answer or give a vague response, the trial cannot proceed normally. For a moment, every single gaze in the courtroom locked on me. The body. Jean's body. I opened my mouth, desperate to answer right away. However, I broke out in a cold sweat. It felt like someone had picked up a hammer and suddenly started pounding inside my skull, sending a sharp, splitting pain through my head. I dropped to my knees while clutching my head. head. A sharp pain shot through my skull as a flood of images flashed past my eyes. In the haze, a blurry face leaned close to my ear, spitting venom. You deserve this. You killed someone, so you should die too. You ruined my entire life. I'll ruin yours as well. I could sense that I was bound and helpless as electric shocks ripped through me again and again, my heart twisted with rage and resentment. Why did I have to go through this? I hadn't done anything. I hadn't hurt anyone. I curled up on the floor, shaking my head over and over, not even aware of what I was doing. No, I don't know. I didn't kill anyone. I swear I didn't. The staff nearby jumped into a panic and rushed over to check on me. After scrambling around for a moment, she pulled me into her arms, pinching my philtrum as she called for the trail to be paused. The defendant is having a stress response. This shows she's suffered inhumane treatment in the past and has serious psychological trauma. If we push on with the hearing like this, it could affect the outcome. Plaintiffs, are you sure you want to continue? She's still your biological daughter after all. Those words cut through the fog in my mind, and I came back to myself a little. My body kept convulsing uncontrollably as I waited for my parents' answer, like it was my last hope. But after a long, heavy silence, they said firmly, she's faking it. She's just trying to get out of this. No matter what trick she pulls, we're going to make her confess and pay today. Otherwise, when will we ever find Jean's body and put her to rest? My heart slowly sank into the abyss, and I silently laughed at myself. At this point, what was I still hoping for? My body started jerking again, probably because the pain buried deep inside finally broke loose. Sebastian's voice was strained, but he still said, please wake her up. It's precisely because we share the same blood that we can't accept what she's done. The Shore family will never acknowledge a murderer as one of our own. But I didn't kill anyone, Sebastian. Why wouldn't any of them believe me? Why couldn't they see the injuries all over my body? Why did they trust the so-called suicide note Jean had left more than they trusted me? Why did they never once try to look into what had really happened? Tears streamed from my eyes and the wounds on my body started bleeding again. Finally, someone in the courtroom couldn't take it anymore. How is this any different from forcing a confession out of her? Setting aside that nothing's been proven yet, even if she really did kill someone, doesn't she at least have the right to receive medical treatment? If this is your flesh and blood, how can you see her like this and feel nothing? Sebastian hunched his shoulders under the weight of those words. He was unable to lift his head and even more unable to look at me. Mom, on the other hand, rounded on the crowd and screamed at them furiously. Why should I feel sorry for her? Look at all the disasters that have hit this family one after another ever since we brought her home. She killed the daughter I raised from birth, and I can't even find the body. I don't know what she went through before she died. And now, you want me to waste my time treating this monster's injuries? I refuse to acknowledge this so-called real daughter. Whatever pain Jean went through, I'll make this monster suffer 10 times more. As she spoke, something in her snapped. She bolted out from the plaintiff's bench, shoved aside the staff member who was holding me, and slapped me across the face again and again. Wake up! Stop faking it! Where did you hide Jean's body? Answer me! She screeched. The courtroom dissolved into chaos. A few staff members rushed over, frowning as they tried to drag Mom away. However, she twisted and fought them, and in the tussle, she drove her kicks straight into my body. Why did you have to kill Jean, Sonia? She shrieked. Dad's face was dark as he stepped in front of the staff members, his voice icy when he spoke. My wife lost her mind after our daughter died. Are you still going to defend Sonia? Only Sebastian saw me cough up a mouthful of dark blood from a hard kick that Mom gave me. He caught Mom's hand, his expression conflicted. Mom, maybe we should stop for today. Sonia really doesn't look so good. Get out of my way! Mom yanked her hand free, her face cold and furious. Sonia may be your sister, but what about Jean? You watched Jean grow up. You know better than anyone what kind of person she was. She didn't so much as hurt a fly. So why did she have to die for no apparent reason? It's been 2 whole years, yet Sonia still refuses to say where Jean's body is. How am I supposed to live with that? Sebastian fell silent and let go of her arm. Just then, the judge on the bench received something. He frowned, then tapped his gavel. Order in the court. In light of the situation, we'll call in medical staff to treat the defendant on site first. No matter what, the trial has to be conducted while the defendant is conscious. Plaintiff, please return to your seat. In a moment, we'll be using the latest technology to conduct the trial. With Dad and Sebastian pulling her back, Mom was reluctantly forced to sit down. Under the shield of the law, I finally got a sip of water. Someone started cleaning and dressing my wounds. When the paramedic saw my injuries, she sucked in a sharp breath, her brows knitting together hard. Why does the defendant have so many signs of abuse on her body? These injuries? This is basically torture. What exactly did you people do to her? No one answered her. After all my wounds were tended to, the staff wheeled in a machine and started explaining it to everyone. This device can read a person's memories. Because it raises serious privacy concerns and there are some radiation side effects, we need consent from both the plaintiff and the defendant. Let me be clear up front that the radiation, I agree. Before the judge could finish, Mom raised her hand, her voice ringing through the courtroom. Use it on her now. It's just a bit of radiation and you're going to put her in a protective suit, right? It's not like she's going to die. Sebastian opened his mouth like he wanted to object, but in the end, he just looked over at me. Do you agree to this? I was half collapsed on the floor, my whole body hurting so much I couldn't move. That bit of radiation might very well kill me, but I still nodded. I agree. I could feel my life slipping away bit by bit. At the very least, I wanted to clear my name while I was still conscious. The staff members gave me sympathetic looks, then carefully helped me into the protective suit and guided me into the glass-enclosed chamber at the center of the machine. The machine whirred to life, and the judge's voice sounded in my ears. Defendant Sonia Shore, I'm going to ask you again. On the day the victim, Jean Shore, died, you disappeared for a period. Where exactly did you go during that time? Was her death connected to you in any way? I shut my eyes, enduring the searing pain of the radiation as my mind was dragged back to that dark, terrible day. Everyone in the courtroom stared at the images appearing on the screen from inside the machine. The face that had always been a blur in my memory finally came into focus for all to see. Sonia Shore, you're going to hell for stealing what's mine. When that sentence rang out, my parents and Sebastian stared at the vicious face on the screen, their own faces instantly turning deathly pale.
When that sentence rang out, my parents and Sebastian stared at the vicious face on the screen, their own faces instantly turning deathly pale. The man on the screen wasn't a stranger. He was someone they knew, someone they had trusted, someone they had brought into the house more than once. I saw Mom's hand begin to shake first, slowly at first, then violently. No, she whispered. That's not possible. But the image didn't stop. It continued moving. Jean stood in the frame like she belonged there, like she had always been part of this nightmare and not the fragile daughter they remembered. Her voice echoed clearly through the courtroom speakers. I told you she wouldn't be believed. The man beside her shifted slightly. You were right, he said. Jean smiled faintly. It was always going to be easy. The recording zoomed in slightly. Her eyes were calm. Too calm. Like everything she had done had already been decided long before that moment. Sebastian took one step forward without realizing it, then stopped, like his body forgot how to continue. This is fake, he said hoarsely. But no one agreed with him. No one even looked at him, because the screen kept going. The memory shifted. A different location. A quiet room. Documents spread across a table. Jean was sitting there, reading them slowly. Medical reports, psychological evaluations, and surveillance logs from the institution I had been sent to. She flipped a page and smiled. So they're still using her. Her finger tapped lightly on one of the documents. She survived longer than expected. The man across from her leaned back. You said she would break within 6 months. Jean's smile didn't change. I underestimated her. Then, after a pause. But she broke eventually. The words hit the courtroom like a physical impact. Mom made it sound like she couldn't breathe properly. Dad grabbed the edge of the bench to steady himself. But Jean on the screen continued speaking calmly, as if discussing something trivial. Once she confesses, everything becomes permanent. No one will look deeper. No one ever does. The memory shifted again. This time, I saw myself. Not the courtroom version. Not the broken version. The earlier one. Before the worst of it. I was in the facility, barely able to stand. My wrists were restrained, and voices surrounded me, asking questions I couldn't answer correctly no matter what I said. Where is Jean Shore's body? Did you act alone? Confess. 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 Each word layered over the next until it felt like noise inside my skull. Then the screen showed something else. Sebastian, standing behind the glass, watching, always watching, not intervening, not stopping it, just observing, like it was necessary, like it was deserved. Mom let out a broken sound. Sebastian? He didn't respond. He couldn't. His eyes were fixed on the screen, unblinking, as if looking away would make it more real. The memory shifted again. This time darker. Restricted area. The lighting was unstable. My body looked weaker than before. There were marks everywhere. Not just injuries. Patterns of repeated harm. Like something had been happening for a long time without interruption. A doctor's voice echoed faintly in the background. Condition deteriorating faster than expected. Another voice responded. Orders came from above. Continue observation. Continue. Not stop. Continue. Sebastian flinched at that word. Just slightly. But I saw it. The screen flickered again. And for the first time, Jean was not speaking. She was listening. Standing in a corridor, watching a monitor feed of me. Silent. Expressionless. Then she tilted her head slightly. She's still resisting, she said. The man beside her answered. Barely. Jean exhaled softly. That's fine. She just needs more time. Mom finally broke. Her knees gave way. She collapsed into the seat behind her. No, this can't be. Dad's voice cracked for the first time. We were told she was dead. Jean's voice on the screen answered immediately. She will be. Soon. The words were not a prediction. They were a plan. The final part of the memory began to surface, but it didn't fully form yet. It flickered. Broken images. My body on the floor. Medical staff shouting. Sebastian's silhouette at the glass. Mom standing still, not moving closer. Dad turning away. And Jean's voice again, softer this time. Almost satisfied. Once she confesses, there's no need for a body. The courtroom erupted instantly. Shouting. Accusations. Chaos. But I could barely hear it anymore. Because the memory was still continuing inside the machine. Still unfolding whether anyone was ready or not. And for the first time, someone in the courtroom said something that wasn't anger. It was fear. She never killed anyone. The courtroom was still shaking with noise when the memory shifted again. But inside the machine, there was only silence. Then, Jean's face appeared once more. Closer this time. Clearer. She was standing in a dim room with a single lamp overhead, the kind of light that made everything look half real. On the table in front of her was a sheet of paper, blank at first, then slowly filling with ink. Her handwriting, careful, deliberate, each stroke calm, like she had all the time in the world. Across from her, the same man from before stood leaning against the wall. He watched without interrupting. Jean didn't look up when she spoke. Make sure it's found in her room. The man gave a small hum. And if they don't believe it? Jean paused, then smiled faintly. They will. She continued writing. The pen didn't stop, not even when she added the final line. Sonia Shore killed me. Mom made a strangled sound in the courtroom. Dad's hand slipped from the bench. Sebastian took a step forward again, then stopped like his legs refused to support him. On the screen, Jean finally set the pen down. She read it once, twice, then tilted her head slightly, as if evaluating a piece of art. It needs blood, she said. The man moved closer. Whose? Jean didn't hesitate. Hers. The memory shifted abruptly. Cold lighting. Metal surfaces. The room where I had first woken up after the rooftop. Except now I wasn't alone. My body was barely conscious, barely responding, but I could still see. Jean stood above me, not masked, not hidden, fully present, watching me like I was something already finished. She crouched slowly. So this is what they call their daughter. Her fingers lightly touched my cheek, not gently, not kindly, evaluating, like a person checking damage. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. Jean smiled. Don't waste energy. You're going to need it later. The screen flickered again. The suicide note appeared, now stained, not clean anymore, not elegant, but deliberately altered, smudged at the edges, as if it had been handled in panic. As if it had been hidden somewhere only I could have accessed. Jean held it up between two fingers. Perfect, she murmured. Then she placed it inside a drawer, locked it, and turned toward the door. Before leaving, she added casually, when they find her, make sure she's alive enough to confess. The man nodded. As you said. The memory jumped again. This time, the Shore mansion. My room. Neat. Unchanged. Except something had been placed on my bed. The envelope. The suicide note. Already positioned. Already staged. Exactly where it needed to be. Mom's voice echoed faintly in the memory. A scream from somewhere else in the house. She's dead. Footsteps. Chaos. Then my door bursting open. Sebastian was the first one in. He didn't look at me. He looked at the paper. Only the paper. Like that was all that mattered. His hand picked it up. Read it. Silence stretched. Then he said one sentence. She did it. Not question. Not doubt. Conclusion. Mom entered behind him seconds later. Her eyes fell on the note immediately. Her breathing stopped. Then, oh my God. Dad stood at the doorway, frozen. The room filled with something heavy. Not grief yet. Not fully. Something more immediate. Certainty turning into hatred too quickly to stop. Sebastian turned finally toward me. For the first time. Really looked at me. And, in that look, there was no hesitation left. Only decision. You're coming with us. The memory fractured. Now faster. More violent. Scenes overlapping. Interrogations. Shouting. Hands grabbing me. Being dragged out of the house. Neighbors watching. Whispers already forming before I even left the gate. Murder. She killed Jean. I always knew something was wrong with her. The word spread like it had been waiting for permission. The final piece of the memory locked into place. Jean again. Standing at a distance, watching the removal of my belongings from the mansion. She didn't intervene. She didn't speak. She just observed. Then, quietly. She won't survive. What comes next? The man beside her asked. And if she does? Jean finally turned away, then said softly, then I'll make sure no one believes she did. Inside the courtroom, the silence broke differently this time. Not with shouting. Not with denial. But with realization spreading too fast to contain. Because everything had been planned. Not discovered. Not assumed. Planned. Sebastian's voice cracked as he stared at the screen. We framed her. It wasn't a question anymore. Mom didn't answer. She couldn't. Dad lowered his head slowly, like something inside him had finally collapsed. And inside the machine, I was still there, watching it all from inside the memory that had already been lived. Already been survived. Already been survived alone. The machine continued running. No one in the courtroom spoke now. Even the air felt different, heavier, like the truth itself had weight. Inside the memory, the scene shifted again. Jean was no longer in the mansion. No longer in the dim room with the suicide note. Now she was in a car. Black, tinted windows. Engine idling quietly in front of the institution where I had been taken. She sat in the back seat, legs crossed, watching the building through the glass. The man beside her spoke without turning. They've already started the transfer procedures. Jean didn't look away from the window. Good. A pause. Then she asked calmly, is she inside yet? Yes. Jean exhaled slowly, like she had been waiting for that confirmation for a long time. Then she smiled. Then everything is going exactly as planned. The memory zoomed forward. A corridor inside the institution. White walls. Locked doors. The sound of distant screaming that never stopped long enough to become normal. And then, me, being led down that corridor. Barely able to walk. Barely aware. A staff member held my arm tightly, not gently but firmly, like I might collapse at any moment. I remember thinking I was being moved for treatment. I remember still believing that word meant something. Treatment. Help. Recovery. But Jean was there, at the end of the corridor, waiting. She stepped into view, as if she had always belonged there. Not a visitor. Not an outsider. Someone who had already been granted access. The staff didn't stop her. They greeted her instead. Miss Shore. That name they gave her. Not me. Her. Jean looked at them briefly, then motioned toward me. I want her in room 7. The staff hesitated. Authorization. Jean held up a document. Stamped. Signed. Official. Everything that made cruelty legal. The hesitation disappeared instantly. Of course. I was taken. Not by guards this time. By permission. Room 7 was colder than the others. Not physically. Emotionally. Like something inside it had been emptied out long before I arrived. They strapped me down. I remember asking faintly, what is this? No one answered. Jean entered after them. She closed the door herself. That detail stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was deliberate. She wanted control even over the sound of it closing. She walked slowly around the chair I was restrained in, looking at me from different angles, like I was something being prepared. Then she stopped in front of me. So this is where you'll stay until it's done, she said softly. My lips moved. No, I didn't. Jean leaned in slightly. And for the first time, her expression changed. Not anger. Not hatred. Something closer to irritation. Like I was refusing to follow a script she had already finished writing. You're still saying that? She asked quietly. Her fingers tapped lightly on the metal armrest. You really think it matters what you say here? She straightened, then added almost gently. It stopped mattering the moment I wrote your name. The memory flickered. A screen in the room turned on. Live feed. The Shore family estate. Mom crying. Dad holding her. Sebastian reading the suicide note again, and again like repetition could turn it into truth. Jean watched it with quiet satisfaction. They're good actors, she said. Then she turned slightly toward me. But they don't even know they're performing. The man from earlier entered the room. He placed a file on the table. Transfer is complete. Jean nodded. Good. Then she looked at me again. Longer this time. Almost thoughtful. You know, she said, I didn't even have to try very hard. That sentence hung in the air. Because it was true. Not just in the memory. In everything. The memory shifted again. Fast. Fragmented. Mom signing documents, without reading them. Dad authorizing medical control. Sebastian confirming identity reports without questioning inconsistencies. Every signature building the cage around me. Every approval making it permanent. And then, the final moment of framing. The suicide note being placed into evidence. Not by police. Not by investigators. By the institution. Handled carefully. Logged officially. Stamped into existence as found in defendant's residence. A lie made legal through paperwork. Jean's voice returned one last time in that memory.
Calm.
Satisfied. Final. She doesn't need to die immediately. She just needs to be believed first. A pause. Then softly. After that, death will come on its own. Inside the courtroom, something cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But completely. Sebastian dropped to his knees without realizing it. Mom covered her mouth, shaking uncontrollably. Dad whispered something that didn't form into words. Because they understood now. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was design. And I was the result. Inside the machine, my vision blurred again. The memory was still going. Still alive. Still unfolding everything I had already lived through once. And the only thing left inside it was how long it would take for the truth to finally destroy the people who created it. The machine hummed louder. Not faster. Not harsher. Just heavier, like it was no longer only showing memory but forcing it to exist in real time. The courtroom did not interrupt anymore. No one dared. Even the judge's hand hovered above the gavel without moving. Inside the memory, everything shifted again. The next scene was not an experiment room. Not a corridor. Not a staged document. It was quiet. Too quiet. A private lounge inside the institution complex. Soft lighting. Clean furniture. The kind of place that didn't belong next to suffering. Jean was sitting on a sofa, legs crossed, sipping tea. She looked almost peaceful, like none of what had been done so far had ever required effort. Across from her, Sebastian was in the memory. Not present in the courtroom version of himself. Younger in the scene. Tired. Conflicted. Still human in a way the present version no longer was. He spoke carefully. We need to verify again. Jean didn't look up from her cup. Verify what? Her confession. A pause. Jean set the cup down. Slowly. Deliberately. Then she smiled faintly. You're still doing that? Sebastian frowned. Doing what? Looking for something that isn't there. Her tone remained gentle. But the words weren't. You already decided she did it. Sebastian hesitated. I didn't. Jean cut him off softly. Yes, you did. Silence. The memory shifted slightly. Jean leaned forward now, elbows resting on her knees. Her voice stayed calm. You saw the note. You saw the timing. You saw how easily she broke under questioning. Sebastian's jaw tightened. She still denies it. Jean gave a small, almost amused exhale. And? That single word landed harder than anything before it. She tilted her head slightly. Do you think guilty people always confess cleanly? Sebastian didn't answer. Jean continued anyway. People like her resist. They always do. Then she leaned back again. But resistance isn't innocence. The scene changed again. Now, it was a monitoring room. Multiple screens. My body visible on one of them. Strapped. Still. Barely conscious. Doctors moving around me like I was an object with malfunctioning parts. Jean stood behind them, observing. The lead doctor spoke quietly. Her vitals are unstable. Jean replied without hesitation. Stabilize them. Another hesitation. That will require reducing stimulation. Jean's gaze didn't move from the screen. No. A pause. Then softer. She needs to remember the consequences of lying. The courtroom shifted slightly. Someone in the audience made a sound of disgust. Then another voice rose. She authorized it? On a civilian? That's illegal. But no one answered them, because the memory had already moved past legality. It no longer cared. Inside the machine, the next sequence began. This one was slower, heavier, more personal. I was alone in a small room. No restraints. For the first time in what felt like a long time. But freedom didn't feel like freedom. It felt like waiting. The door opened. Jean entered. No staff. No escort. Just her. She closed it behind her and locked it from the inside. Then she looked at me for a long moment. Not studying anymore. Confirming. Like something was reaching its final stage. You're still holding on, she said quietly. I didn't respond. My body barely moved. Jean walked closer. Stopped just out of reach. You know what's funny? She asked. Then answered herself. No matter what they do to you, you still think telling the truth matters. She crouched slightly to meet my eyes. That's the part one couldn't stand. A pause. Then softer. Because it meant I wasn't enough. My voice came out broken. I didn't do anything. Jean didn't react immediately. Then she nodded slowly. I know. That answer made the room colder. Because it wasn't confusion. It was acknowledgement. The memory flickered. For the first time, something different surfaced. Jean standing alone in a mirror room. No one else present. Just her reflection. And for a brief moment, just a brief moment, her expression wasn't satisfied. It wasn't cruel. It was tired. But it disappeared quickly. Like she noticed it happening and buried it immediately. She turned away from the mirror. And said quietly, it's too late to change it now. Back in the institution. The final framing sequence began. Doctors handing over finalized reports. Security logging false confession stability. Evidence packets being sealed. Each one stamped with approval. Each one pushing a single narrative into permanence. And finally, the last document. The suicide note. Officially recorded as recovered from my room. Not Jean's handwriting anymore. Not her manipulation anymore. Just evidence. A truth created by repetition. The memory stopped moving for a moment, as if even it needed to breathe. Then Jean's voice returned one last time. Very soft. Almost distant. She just needs to survive long enough to be blamed. A pause. Then, after that, she won't matter anymore. Inside the courtroom, something shifted. Not loudly, but irreversibly. Mom collapsed fully this time. unable to remain upright. Dad's hands trembled uncontrollably. Sebastian stared at the screen like it had stopped being real and become something else entirely. A record. A verdict against them. Not Sonia. Them. And inside the machine, I was still there. Still alive. Still remembering. While the truth finally stopped belonging to anyone who had tried to bury it. Inside the machine, the memory did not stop. It simply deepened. Like it had reached the part it had been building toward all along. The screens flickered once more. And Jean appeared again. But this time, she was not speaking to anyone in particular. She was alone in a sealed administrative office. Stacks of files surrounded her. All marked with my name. Sonia Shore. She flipped through them slowly. Medical reports. Behavior logs. Interrogation transcripts. Each page reinforced the same conclusion. Each page built the same story. A story she had helped shape from the beginning. Then the door opened. A staff member entered cautiously. Everything has been processed as instructed. Jean didn't look up. Good. A pause. The staff member hesitated. And the defendant? Jean finally closed the file in her hands. She'll break completely within the next cycle. The staff member looked uncertain. And if she doesn't confess clearly enough? Jean stood. For the first time, her expression hardened slightly.
She will. Her voice was calm. Certain.
Not hopeful.
Certain.
The memory shifted again. This time it was earlier. Before everything had fully collapsed. A private family room. Mom was sitting at the table, staring at the suicide note. Dad stood beside her. Sebastian was pacing. The note lay in the center like an object none of them wanted to touch too directly. Mom spoke first. She wouldn't do this. Her voice shook. Dad didn't answer immediately. Then said, but her handwriting. Sebastian stopped pacing. Handwriting can be forged. Mom looked at him sharply. You think someone would forge something like this? Sebastian didn't respond right away, because he already knew the answer was yes. But he didn't say it. Instead, he said something else. She's the only one who had access to Jean's room that night. Silence. That sentence was enough. Not proof. Just placement. The memory shifted again. Now, it was interrogation. Me. Standing barely upright. Surrounded by voices. Lights too bright. Questions repeating in different forms. Where is the body? Why did you do it? Who helped you? Each time I answered no. Each time the answer became the wrong one. Sebastian was present behind the glass again. Watching. Always watching. But this time, something was different in his expression. Not belief. Not disbelief. Conflict. For the first time, Jean appeared in another feed. Speaking with officials. Her voice steady. Controlled. If she continues denying it, escalate pressure. One of them hesitated. She's already severely injured. Jean's response was immediate. Then she'll break faster. No emotion. No hesitation. Just outcome. The memory began to fracture. Pieces overlapping. Mom signing approval forms without reading them. Dad authorizing continued interrogation under urgent clarification procedures. Sebastian marking reports as inconclusive, but proceeding. Each action feeding into the same system. Not created by one person. Sustained by all of them. Then, the moment of final framing. The suicide note being placed into official evidence storage. A technician speaking casually. It matches the recovered item from the defendant's residence. Another voice. Chain of custody confirmed. No one questioned it.
No one needed to.
Because the story was already complete. It only needed storage. The memory slowed. Then stopped entirely for a moment. Jean appeared one final time. Standing in an empty corridor. No witnesses. No staff. Just silence around her. For a long time she didn't speak. Then finally, she won't survive this. A pause. Then softer. But she doesn't need to. A faint breath. Only the story does. The courtroom erupted inside reality. Not all at once, but breaking in layers. Someone shouted. She constructed everything. Another voice. They helped her. It was never evidence. It was fabrication. The judge slammed the gavel, but it barely mattered anymore. Order had already failed, because truth had already arrived. Mom was sobbing uncontrollably now. Not denial. Not defense. Collapse. Dad stood frozen, staring at nothing. Sebastian's voice finally broke through. Barely audible. We did this. No one corrected him. No one argued. Because the screen had already proven it too many times. Inside the machine, my body moved slightly. Not because I had strength left, but because the memory was ending where it began. Jean's final recorded voice echoed one last time. She just needs to be believed. A pause. And then she'll disappear on her own. The screen went white. Then black. The machine powered down slowly. Silence filled the courtroom. Not the silence of confusion anymore. The silence of understanding. Complete. Irreversible. I was still inside the chamber. Barely conscious. The world around me blurred at the edges. Mom stumbled forward first. Her voice cracked completely. Sonia. Dad followed. Sebastian too. All of them reaching too late for something they had already lost long before this moment. But I didn't move toward them. Not because I didn't hear them, but because there was nothing left to return to. The judge spoke quietly. The defendant is cleared of all charges. No applause followed. No celebration. Only stillness. Because no verdict could fix what had already happened. And as the last of the machine's light faded, the only thing left in the room was the truth. I was never the crime. I was the consequence of someone else's decision to be believed. And they had finally learned it, when there was nothing left to save. The silence in the courtroom didn't last long, because the truth, once exposed, did not remain gentle. It spread. Fast. Too fast to contain. Orders were issued immediately after the machine shut down. Detention. Arrest. Investigation into every record, every signature, every authorization linked to the Shore case. But none of that mattered to me anymore. I was already fading in and out of consciousness when I saw them drag someone in. Jean Shore. Alive. Not in memory. Not in footage. Real. Her hands were bound, but her expression was still calm. Not frightened. Not surprised. Just watching. As if this was simply a new stage of something she had already accepted, would end this way. Mom made a broken sound the moment she saw her. No. Dad stepped back, as if struck. Sebastian didn't move at all. He just stared at her like he was trying to reconcile two realities that could no longer exist together. The perfect daughter. The smiling girl in photographs. And the woman standing in front of them now. Jean was brought before the court. No longer as a witness. No longer as anything protected by family name or memory. The judge's voice was sharp. Jean Shore. You are accused of falsifying evidence, orchestrating unlawful detention, abuse, and attempted murder. A pause. Do you deny these charges? Jean finally smiled faintly. Not proudly. Not cruelly.
But lightly.
Like the question itself was unnecessary. No, she said. That single word ended any remaining illusion. Mom collapsed fully this time. Not fainting. Not trembling. Just collapsing into grief that had nowhere left to go. Dad's voice broke as he whispered her name again and again, like repetition could reverse reality. Sebastian stepped forward. For the first time, his voice wasn't controlled. It cracked completely. Why? Jean looked at him. Really looked at him. And for a moment, something almost human flickered across her expression. Not regret. Not remorse. Something quieter.
Tiredness.
Then it disappeared. I was here first, she said softly. That was all. The courtroom did not accept it. Not morally. Not legally. Not anymore. The verdict came quickly after that.
Guilty.
All charges confirmed. No appeals. No delay. Outside, the news spread instantly. The perfect heiress, exposed as the architect of a fabricated murder. A family destroyed by their own blind trust. A false confession that had almost killed an innocent woman. And the real victim, still barely alive.
Jean was taken away that same day.
No longer surrounded by admiration. No longer protected by the illusion she had built. Only silence followed her now. No hatred shouted. No sympathy offered. Just absence. The kind that replaces everything after truth has finished burning it down. Later, in detention, she was asked one final question before sentencing. Was it worth it? Jean didn't answer immediately. She looked down for a long moment, then spoke quietly. I didn't want to lose. A pause. Then even softer. But I still did. The sentence was carried out in the only form the system allowed. Not execution. Not violence. But removal. From title. From inheritance. From identity. From everything she had used to justify what she had done. The Shore name no longer belonged to her. It no longer belonged to anyone who had protected her lies. In the days that followed, the institution was shut down. Officials arrested. Records exposed. Every false report rewritten in public record as coercion and fabrication. But none of that reached me in time to matter. Because by then, I was no longer in the courtroom. I remember very little of what came after. Only fragments. Soft voices. Hands no longer hurting me. Someone saying my name, without accusation for the first time. Sebastian kneeling beside a hospital bed he couldn't fix. Mom crying without asking forgiveness. Dad unable to look away. But none of it changed what had already been lived through. Jean's final record was sealed. Not erased.
Kept.
As proof of what had been done. And what had been believed too easily. And, in the end, there was no victory. No triumph. No perfect justice. Only consequences finally arriving in the right direction. Too late to save what had already been destroyed. But not too late to expose who had done it. And Jean Shore, the girl everyone once mourned, was remembered not as a victim, but as the person who turned grief into a weapon, and used it against the wrong target, until there was nothing left of her story but the truth.
Sharp.
Undeniable. And irreversible. The ruin didn't come all at once. It came in layers, like something carefully built finally deciding it could no longer hold its shape. The Shore estate was the first to fall, not physically at first, financially. Accounts frozen, assets seized, properties flagged for investigation. Lawyers who had once rushed to answer every call now stopped picking up entirely. The name Shore stopped opening doors. It started closing them. Inside the mansion, silence settled where noise used to live. No staff footsteps. No morning reports. No scheduled meetings. Just rooms that felt larger than they should have, because no one was left inside them anymore. Mom stayed in her bedroom most days. Not speaking. Not eating properly. Just sitting in the same place where she had once signed papers without reading them. Over and over again, she would whisper the same thing. I believed her. But there was no one left to answer. Dad tried to fix it at first. He went to meetings. To court offices. To investigators. To anyone who would still take his name seriously. But every door he entered, he left weaker than before. By the end of the second week, he stopped going out at all. He sat in the study with his hands folded, staring at documents that no longer had power. The authority he once carried had evaporated. Not taken.
Lost.
Sebastian was the last to break, outwardly. At first he tried to continue as if structure could still exist. He issued statements. He cooperated with investigations. He answered questions without emotion. But at night he stopped sleeping. He would sit alone in the empty conference room of what used to be the family business building, watching the same footage over and over again. The memory recordings. The ones that showed everything. Each time, he looked less like someone analyzing truth, and more like someone being destroyed by it repeatedly. Jean's downfall was different. It didn't begin with silence. It began with exposure. Once her recordings were released publicly, there was no recovery. Every action she had taken was documented. Every instruction she had given. Every moment she had smiled while ensuring someone else suffered. The world did not debate it for long. There was nothing ambiguous left to interpret. In court, she no longer spoke often. There was no point. The evidence spoke louder than she ever could. But in the final hearings, when asked again why she did it, she gave the same answer as before. I didn't want to lose. And this time, no one misunderstood her. The sentencing removed everything she had used to define herself. Her status, her inheritance, her public identity. Even her name in official registries was marked with legal nullification. What remained was not a heiress, not a victim, not a symbol, just a person stripped down to consequence. In the institution where I once was, now empty and sealed, investigators walked through the halls slowly. They documented every room, every restraint mark, every record of authorization signed by people who had believed too easily. One of them stopped in the corridor where I had once been dragged.
He didn't speak.
Just stood there for a long time, then wrote something in his file, and moved on. Mom visited the facility once after everything. She didn't go far inside. She couldn't. She stopped at the entrance and looked down the corridor like she expected to see me still there. But there was nothing. Only clean walls. And emptiness that didn't echo anymore. She left without speaking to anyone. Dad never went. Sebastian went once. He stood in the observation room, the same place where he had once watched without stopping anything. This time, there were no screens, no feeds, only reflection. And he realized something quietly. That watching had been its own form of participation. He didn't stay long. Jean's final days in custody were quiet. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just absence of everything she once controlled. No audience. No influence. No narrative to shape. Only time passing without her permission. Before the final transfer, she was asked one last time if she had anything to say. She paused. Long enough that it almost seemed like she might finally break her silence in a different way. But in the end, she only said, "If I had been believed first, none of this would have mattered." No one responded, because it wasn't a defense anymore. Just an ending she couldn't rewrite. And in the aftermath, there was no healing that matched the damage. Only consequences spreading outward. Families fractured. Institutions rebuilt. Records rewritten. Lives continuing with something missing at their center. The Shore family did not recover. Not really. They existed after, but differently. Like something once whole had been permanently divided. And as for Jean, she was remembered not as the perfect daughter anymore. Not as the victim she pretended to be, but as the person who proved something no one in that family could undo. That belief, once given without truth, can destroy everything it touches, including the people who thought they were protecting it. And in the end, the ruin wasn't just theirs. It belonged to everyone who waited too long to question what they thought they already knew.